Probably a website video. Dana Garrett, this guy I don't really like much, but anyway, he's made a video response to one of Conference Report's videos, and yeah, I just don't, it's just an interesting study in communication, because it's, so hard to extract exactly what's being said. So it's called the propositional nature of values and valuing, which I suppose is a statement saying that all values are declarations by a brain of value. I mean, I can't even make any sense of that, just because everything like brownies, or whatever. I mean, food is just such an easy target. I mean, the value is right there in front of us. You either like it or you don't like it. Sometimes you really, really like it, and sometimes you really, really hate it. And it has nothing to do with any kind of thought or cognition. It just has to do with something pretty visceral and native and natural, and it doesn't really have a propositional nature. But anyway, I don't know. Let's try to make sense of some of this. See what happens for the hell of it.
In his video, Conference Report continues a series of videos he has done about value, its origin and nature, and particularly its relationship to sentience.
Alright, now see, this guy, he writes his videos, which is good. I mean, I like that people order their argument and all that kind of stuff, and, so that's okay with me. But this hissing microphone thing, come on, gotta fix that.
In his video, No Value Without Sentience and Vice Versa, Conference Report vests his argument in the idea that in evolutionary history, feelings precede thinking for sentient creatures that can think. From there, he argues that since values are associated with feelings, they therefore originated with feelings and, in fact, are a form of feeling.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much of that is, taking a little too much license even for me. I don't know if I would call a thought a form of a feeling. They're tainted by feelings. I mean, you can't give the thoughts valuation, and you can't give them priority in a brain unless you do cover them with some sort of feeling, some sort of, yes, this is good thinking, no, this is bad thinking, this is positive, negative. I mean, there are feelings attached to every thought. Every word has an image, and an image has an emotion. So there's a connection. Whether it's all necessary or not, well, I don't know. Well, anyway, continue.
Now, it strikes me that there are potentially several things wrong with this kind of argument. First, although it is all the rave for people on YouTube to assume that the evolutionary history of mental functions is transparently obvious, and to speak of it as if this historical matter was entirely empirical and non-controversial.
Well, I mean, some of it is. I mean, 5 digits on our fingers. We can go through different things and say, yeah, okay, we really do know the history of that feature of our existence. And so when it comes to the intelligence thing, yeah, there's sort of, by process of elimination, you draw some conclusions about what must be, because it doesn't make any logical sense for it to be any other way. And there's not much point in there being a circumstance in nature created. We sort of do see that pattern over time, where organisms don't have abilities that are of no use. They have things left over from a period where things had a different use, but they just don't create things that stick out or do something that can kill them, put them at risk, create unnecessary complexity. That's just not the rule. And so, yeah, so when you're talking about what a feeling is and what a thought is, you do have to look at the fact that feelings have there'll be no point in them without a brain to analyze them, without something that can appreciate them, know the difference between them, and act accordingly. Because they're not direct reflexes. We might as well just have a direct reflex. There'd be no point in having the feeling. And there's often feelings associated with events that don't have any purpose, as we can define, so we can look at that and say, well, why do we have a sensation attached to it? And the answer is simple, is because it's left over from an earlier period, and we're feeling nothing related to the new event or the old event. Alright, that's convoluted. A sneeze, for example, right? Feels good. Well, why? We don't make ourselves sneeze. There's no point in us having a reward for sneezing. The feeling is just a consequence of the mechanism of our functionality. It isn't there for any evolutionary purpose. It's just a consequence of becoming conscious. So the sneeze happened first. We became sentient after, and had nerves in places where all of a sudden now we're going to feel something when certain things happen where we didn't feel them before. Yeah, that's a good enough explanation. I mean, but the point is you can do it through deduction.
From my reading of the evolutionary history of mental functions, these matters are widely debated and not obvious at all.
Yeah, well, that doesn't really mean anything, okay? Because somebody could say, from my reading, the question of God's existence is an open question, blah, 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 blah. And that's not really true.
No one was witness to this evolutionary history across time. It is remarkable that anyone believes that this evolutionary history would be anything but insurmountably ambiguous and debatable.
Again, so why your evidence, your proof of that is what? So we obviously know that some parts of it are not insurmountable. You see the little scars on a snake, and and some old bone features. You find a hip inside of a whale, and you say, well, what is that doing there? What are those little pieces that had to be connected to something? What are they doing back there? I mean, it's not hard to deduct why they're there and what their history was. So yeah, so some pieces are going to be easier to put together than other pieces. And I don't think anybody on YouTube is doing any, well, I insist this must be the way it is. No, they're placing a propositional statement on the table and saying that here's an evidence, here's a theory, and here's the evidence of the theory. Now, you don't want to argue the evidence. You just want to argue that people aren't allowed to theorize, and that's all you're doing here. You're just sitting there and saying, we think it's all way too mysterious, and please don't prove our God doesn't exist. Especially don't prove it logically. That's all you're doing here, really. You're just making the argument from, we've got to keep it a mystery. Maybe it doesn't need to be a mystery. Maybe we can deduce the truth. But you have to talk about it before you can do that deduction thing.
Second, even if the evolutionary history of mental functions were known, that is, even if we knew the sequence of the development of mental functions, it wouldn't necessarily tell us anything about which mental functions predominate in the performance of affective and cognitive acts like valuing.
Well, now you're just getting silly. It doesn't matter anyway. I mean, that relationship is sort of irrelevant to the point. So, and what we do know about valuing, okay, that I think can be stated with real hard authority, is that there's two parts to our identity, our capacity, our capability. There's a subjective part, individual to ourselves, that has has values. All right, like a sexual disposition, and then there's an intellectual self that can understand broader context and establish what is valuable in the system that might be humanity, or in the system that might be the universe. And those are different definitions. Your self-interest is different than the town's interest, is different than the state interest, is different than the nation interest, is different than the humanity interest. I mean, these are all different levels of efficiency or function, and we value personally or objectively as a thought, an intellectual proposition, very differently. Those two we can draw, the same person can have inconsistent values. One of them can be through their intelligence, the other one can be personal.
For example, even if feeling preceded thinking historically for human beings, it hardly follows that human beings are essentially, to use conference reports characterization, feeling beings that think, or that thinking is merely a form of feeling.
But I think it is reasonable to state that there's clearly a connection throughout human history between self-interest, okay, and what kind of value propositions occur to people. So there's basically this obvious corruption of the value engine by the personal interest engine. The values of the lizard, the feeling lizard, if we could use that terminology, if that's legal, the values of that feeling lizard, okay, who's just thinking strawberry, me, bite, bite, you know, me is what it's thinking. Me, that has dominated, all right, and the intelligence, the knowledge-capable machinery or mechanism has been in servitude to that lizard's values. It is a scheming device used to figure out how to get lizard to strawberry. Okay, the human beings haven't calculated what is the right thing to do. They have calculated what do I get out of it? Show me the fucking money. That's all human beings have been saying for a long time.
That is to assume that the effect cannot be greater than or different in kind from its cause, and that is fallacious. Even if feeling preceded thinking historically for human beings, it could very well be that the mental life of human beings, including their feelings, is so influenced and permeated by their cognitive functions that thinking predominates their mental life.
Yeah, so if he really didn't get what he was saying there, he was basically making the argument that there's reason or cause to believe that human beings are behaving like Mr. Spock in the world, okay, you know, like the Spock-Kirk difference. And so he's basically saying that no, humans aren't apes who are using their brain like a hammer, you know. No, human beings are this eloquent thinking machine who is controlling their desire and their self-interest with their brilliant intelligence and moderating and being disciplined. No, there's no example of any of that crap. And it's only when it's only that the truth is being forced down the throat of the human lizard because of people willing to say straight out to people, you're an asshole, yeah, people have to have the conversation and start accounting for their behavior.
Third, even if values or valuing are associated with feeling,
Oh, come on, associated with feeling? I mean, really, how can you say that, like, that's even if it's theoretically possible that a feeling is a value statement, which it is, I mean, you just can't undo that. I mean, feelings are value statements. What else are they? Feelings, there's generally, most feelings fall into a category of that feels good or that feels bad. There's very few feelings that have no positive or negative character. They are all feelings or basically value statements.
By no means follows that values or valuing originated with feeling.
Again, this is, well, I'm sorry. I mean, this is the desire, and attraction and repulsion, okay, this is where deductively you just can't miss it, is a fundamental function of the biology. Okay, get to the food, avoid the predator. I mean, this is as basic as it gets. This is the foundation of the whole cause for any evolution to even take place, is this competition of getting and avoiding. And the whole point of the feeling mechanism is to create a mechanism that makes it more efficiently get and avoid through associating action with positive and negative result or impact or feeling. I mean, come on, this is just basic stuff. I mean, you know, not to accept that argument, whatever, there's just nowhere to go. I mean, the value nature of feelings, you're going to contend that feelings don't have a value nature?
Association does not equal identity. As a matter of fact, it is on this matter that I think conference report's argument falters the most. I believe conference report conflates having a value to having a proclivity or instinct or tendency.
Yeah, well, whatever. An instinct or proclivity or tendency or conditioning, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. It creates a value statement within the being. All right, I am a product of my conditioning. I mean, I could come up with different examples, but look, even, you know, who knows where this one came from? I mean, I didn't have any trauma associated with scrambled eggs and sausage, but my whole life, I remember as a kid, I hated the smell of eggs and sausage. I just hated it. All right, and the rest of my family loved that smell, obviously. And it's like I couldn't even, had to get out of the fucking house at 6 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't stand that smell permeating every fucking surface in the fucking house. So that was a strong value, okay, imposed by biology, imposed by the crudest of mechanism. I didn't give it one moment's thought. I didn't have to think about it and figure out, well, do I really think it stinks? No, it stunk. Okay, I didn't need to sit there and deliberate and figure it out. No, it made me want to puke. Yeah, it was completely offensive to my sensibilities. It was a huge, gigantic, monstrous value statement that had absolutely nothing to do with any cognition.
Just because his dog might have a proclivity or instinct to chase rabbits, it hardly follows that his dog holds the value that it is good or worthwhile to chase rabbits.
You're just taking out of the mechanism. The whole point is that the dog doesn't just chase the rabbit as a mechanical process. It chases the rabbit because it's got a hunger for it, a passion for it. It is stimulated into the action. All right, it's got a heart on. It's got a boner for rabbits.
Holding a value is propositional in nature and necessarily takes the form of some expression like P values X. I challenge anyone to offer a lucid and unambiguous account of what it means for a sentient being to hold a value that doesn't entail the ascription to at least one proposition taking that form. I don't know what the hell that was.
I mean, do you know what that was? I don't know what that was. I mean, we'll have to play it again, and then we can play it again, and then we can play it again. I mean, what is his challenge? I mean, I can't figure it out.
Give us account of what it means for a sentient being to hold a value that doesn't entail the ascription to at least one proposition taking that form.
To hold a value that doesn't entail at least one proposition holding that form. Again, so if you find a smell repulsive, there's no proposition in there. You just find it repulsive. It's personally repulsive. I just don't. You're not making a statement that all this is or all that is or ain't. You're just repulsed as a human being. You are inundated by a sense of repulsion.
I don't think it can be done. I don't even think that a non-propositional account of holding values can make sense.
A non-propositional account of holding values. I mean, again, a proposition, as I understand it, is a statement. I mean, a proposition is water is wet. Feelings are not consistent from individual to individual. That would sort of be, you know, a proposition, a theory, a statement, a definition of the truth. I mean, this thing produces, fire, or, these are bad examples. Tape is sticky? Yeah, it's a proposition. So I'm just saying, our body makes lots of value statements. It screams them into our brain, okay? And our brain can say, well, that's stupid, and that's selfish, and that's dumb. I mean, it can value the value statements being made by our body. But I don't know what you're saying.
Now, if I am correct that holding a value is propositional in nature, then it would seem that holding a value isn't merely a property of sentience, but of rationality and self-consciousness as well.
As well. Well, who's arguing it's not as well? So if you just state it's the as well part, then we'd be doing just fine, because nobody's arguing that. Conference report isn't arguing that the only place we get values from is our feet or our toes or some sort of reflexive mechanism. No, he's perfectly willing to explain in detail how we can intellectually model the world and see other elements of value and represent them and understand them and have all kinds of capacity to, like, even I could say, I hate eggs and sausage. Well, as a thinking human, though, I could understand that eggs and sausage is good because it makes most people happy. I can understand that most people is more important than one people. And I could say, in general, eggs and sausage is good because it's good for most people, even though it sucks for me.
Oh. It must be a property of rationality if it is propositional, since what is propositional is constitutive, at a minimum, of holding a belief. Less obvious.
Whatever. Again, holding a belief, enforcing, reinforcing. I mean, how do you even get to the holding of a belief part? Well, you're only going to get there through some sort of mechanism that validates that logic that got you there, or validates the thinking. But again, it's that thinking part. It has very little to do with the nature of the animal and how the animal itself acquired the capacity to think. The fact is, our brain did not develop so it could do abstract thinking about the welfare of all sentient beings in the universe. No, we have it because it was a scheming tool. The fact that it has this more diverse purpose of being able to, in a Mr. Spockian way, see the big picture, see how the system works, and find efficiencies in the system and not in the individual. The fact that it can be separated from my genetic code and actually be in service to some other genetics altogether, not even related to mine, maybe 1 million years later. I could be an advocate for a polar bear or some other organism that could be 1 million years my ancestor, my relation.
Is why holding a value must be a property of self-consciousness. Yet I believe a little reflection reveals it to be so.
Yeah, whatever. I just think that's silly. A dog and his bone is a value relationship. So, fail.
Values, like all propositions that are entertained and held, are entertained and held by thinking subjects. To entertain...
Well, again, I mean, what's the point? So you're saying that anything that has a felt desire, in a primitive organism is not a value statement. I mean, it certainly is to that primitive organism, and it certainly is to most of humanity. I would argue that you want to challenge, I challenge you to go show me a human behavior that isn't polluted by a personal interest.
And hold them indicates they are conscious for thinking subjects. They are therefore a property of self-consciousness. That they are ready at hand, easily executable, and associated with feeling, even strong feeling, hardly means that they are neither propositional nor consciously held. There is no non-question begging reason to believe that accessibility and speed of access are the exclusive province of affect.
Holy shit. What the fuck does that mean again? Speed and blah 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 affects. I mean, whatever. You know, whatever. You can't speak a better form of English than that.
The upshot of my view, then, is that it is probably less fruitful to speculate about the evolutionary and historical origins of values, and more fruitful to examine what holding values must be a property of.
Well, a property of. I mean, what is that? Holding values must be a property of. And it wouldn't be there'd be no point in looking at the origins. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. The origins will show you functionality, and will show you the defects that might exist in functionality of deciding values. As I've just pointed out, the difference between selfish values that are going to be narrow to your personal interest, and values that are going to have a more meaningful and substantive definition in the bigger picture system. I mean, the game isn't the cardboard, the game is the box, or some other suitable metaphor.
I would say, therefore, that when a sentient being is also rational and self-conscious, the conditions attained for that sentient, rational, self-conscious being to hold values. Values that are propositional in nature and must be propositional in nature to count as values at all.
Well, whatever. Again, you keep saying that somehow there's an integrity to values that are acquired through a mental process. And those values are often just an interpretation and are often just stimulated by personal interest, personal ego, personal gain, personal... So I mean, there's just no point in doing that. I mean, certainly we're capable of performing logic, and we can start off with 5 or 10 premises, and then we can just have a competition to logically build on top of those premises. But there's just no point in saying that in discussions of what has value, that somehow human beings are at that point where we are establishing objective premises of value and then building on it. No, the entire human race is behaving based on what makes it horny and what makes it hungry and what it has an attachment to and what it has an addiction to. These are not concepts. I mean, again, you deal with the word addiction even. Deal with that word in this value context and explain how the acquisition of a taste for something, that acquisition has legitimacy as a proposition.
In any meaningful sense of the term. Thank you.
So, whatever. Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, but this is the way people are talking on the internet, so this is you got to deal with this stuff, but it's really almost impossible. You can't have a straight language conversation about what somebody's exactly saying. And what exactly I mean, why didn't you just quote conference report instead of this? Well, you did quote one sentence, but not good enough. Really, not even close to good enough. So, until next time.